There are only a few days left until July 26th, and you may be wondering, what is the point of celebrating a feast if my heart arrives distracted and empty? The Church, wise mother, never allows us to arrive abruptly at her great days. First, she takes us by the hand and prepares us slowly, like someone tidying up the house before receiving a cherished guest. Therefore, before we celebrate the holy grandparents of Jesus, it is worthwhile to pause and prepare our souls. These pages are precisely that, a simple pathway, so that when the day of St. Joachim and St. Anne arrives, we do not come with empty hands, but with hearts ignited in the faith of those elders who knew how to wait for God. Before we continue, tell us, where are you watching us from today? Leave us your city and country in the comments. It's beautiful to know how far our community of faith reaches. And also take the opportunity to share your prayer intentions for St. Joachim and St. Anne. We will pray together for each petition, because here, no one walks alone on the path of faith. Chapter 1. Why prepare the heart before the feast? There is a very ancient custom in the Church. No important celebration arrives without warning. Just as Easter has its Lent and Christmas has its Advent, the feasts of the saints also ask for an inner vigil. It is not merely a decorative element of the calendar, but a pedagogy of grace. God wants to find us awake. Preparing the heart is like opening the door of the house before the visitor knocks, so that when the designated day arrives, we are not caught sleeping or occupied with other things. Saints Joachim and Anne deserve that attentive waiting because their entire story was a long preparation. For years they awaited the fulfillment of a promise, and in that waiting they polished their faith like a precious stone. Preparing for their feast is, in essence, to imitate them, to learn from them the art of waiting for God without fatigue, trusting that His providence never arrives late. The great tradition of the Church helps us to recognize the greatness of this couple. St. John Damascene, one of the fathers of the Church, exclaimed with admiration, "O blessed couple, Joachim and Anne, all of creation is indebted to you, for through you, creation offered the Creator the best of all gifts." If such a great saint paused to contemplate these spouses, how can we not dedicate a few days to devout preparation for them? Preparing the heart does not require great feats, but rather small, constant gestures. A moment of silence, a prayer repeated with love, a serene examination of one's own life. Little by little, these gestures clear the soul of noise and make it capable of receiving the feast with depth. Those who prepare in this way discover that July 26th ceases to be just another date and becomes a true encounter. Let us begin, then, this journey with humility and joy. We do not walk alone. We are accompanied by two elders filled with faith who well understand the weight of waiting and the sweetness of fulfilled promises. May they, from heaven, teach us to prepare our hearts so that the approaching feast finds in us good soil, ready to receive the seed of grace. Chapter 2. The School of Hope. Pious tradition tells that Joachim and Anne reached old age without having children, and that this absence was a silent wound for them. In their time, the lack of offspring was experienced as a shame and even as a sign of punishment. However, those spouses did not let sadness or the looks of others defeat them. Every morning they renewed their trust, and every night they surrendered their sorrow into the hands of God. Their entire life became, unbeknownst to them, a true school of hope. Waiting is one of the hardest things for the human heart. We want quick answers, immediate solutions, visible signs. But Christian hope is not impatience in disguise. It is the serene certainty that God fulfills His promises in His time, not ours. Joachim and Anna learned this lesson through their own experiences, and that's why they can teach it to us, who often give up as soon as the answer takes a little while. Preparing for their feast is, above all, allowing ourselves to be shaped by this patient hope. What promise are you waiting for in silence? What prayer have you been repeating for years without seeing the fruit? The eve of this feast is a good time to renew your trust and say, like those elders, Lord, I don't understand your timing, but I trust in your love. That surrender is worth more than 1,000 impatiences. The hope of Joachim and Anna was not a naive illusion, but a virtue rooted in faith. They knew that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob does not abandon his own. Therefore, their waiting was not tinged with bitterness, but with a deep peace that sustained their days. Those who wait like this do not live hunched over in fear, but stand tall, with their gaze set on the horizon where the promise emerges. These days of preparation can become a small novitiate of hope. Whenever you feel tempted to become discouraged, remember these two elders who grew old without ceasing to believe. Their story tells us that no wait lived in faith is wasted time, but rather ground that God secretly prepares to give at his time the most beautiful of fruits. Chapter 3. The Inner Desert, Fasting and Penance. The tradition recorded in ancient writings recounts a touching gesture of Saint Joachim. Wounded in his heart by the lack of a child, he withdrew to the desert and remained there fasting and praying for 40 days and 40 nights. He was not fleeing from his problems. He was seeking God in solitude, giving his whole body and soul to that supplication. That silent retreat became the place where heaven heard his cry. The number 40 is not coincidental in the history of salvation. Moses spent 40 days on the mountain, the people walked for 40 years in the desert, and the Lord fasted for 40 days before beginning his mission. Joachim joins that long line of believers who learned that the desert, far from being a punishment, is the place where the soul sheds the superfluous and is left alone with God. Preparing for their feast invites us to seek our own small inner desert. There is no need to go to a remote place to live this penance. It is enough to renounce something that binds us, a meal, a whim, an hour of distraction, a complaint that was about to leave our lips. Each small sacrifice offered with love opens space in the heart and makes it more sensitive to the voice of God. Penance does not seek to make us suffer for suffering's sake, but to free us from everything that prevents us from truly loving. Joachim's fasting was not a sad act, but a test of trust. He fasted because he believed that it was worth waiting on God more than any human comfort. So too, by offering our small renunciations during these days, we demonstrate through our actions what is often hard to express in words, that God takes first place and that we place all our hope in him. May these days leading up to the feast have their share of dessert, a little silence amid the noise, a little fasting amid abundance, a little prayer amid the rush. With these simple gestures, we imitate Saint Joachim, who found the answer from heaven in solitude. And who knows, perhaps like him, God has reserved for us a joy we cannot yet imagine. Chapter 4. The Novena, a journey of 9 days. Among the most cherished devotions of the Catholic people is the novena, this custom of praying for 9 consecutive days in preparation for a feast or asking for a grace. Since then, the Church has regarded the number 9 as a blessed time of trusting anticipation, which is why the novena to Saint Joachim and Saint Anne is the most traditional way to prepare for their feast. Starting 9 days before July 26th, the novena turns each day into a step that brings us closer to the celebration. It's not a mechanical repetition of words, but an ascent of the soul. Each day we meditate on a virtue of these holy spouses, present an intention, and ask for their intercession. Thus, when the feast arrives, the heart is not cold, but rather warmed by 9 days of familiar interaction with them. Praying the novena as a family has a special value. Gathering parents, children, and grandparents around the same prayer weaves bonds that no rush can break. In those moments, the elders teach the younger ones to bless themselves, to repeat a short prayer, and to look at the images of the saints with affection. The novena then becomes a school of domestic faith, where grace passes from generation to generation, just as it did in the home of Joachim and Anne. The novena can be accompanied by other pious gestures that are very much a part of our tradition. The Holy Mass, the recitation of the Holy Rosary, a time of adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. It is not about accumulating prayers, but about allowing these days to take on a different hue, marked by the closeness of God. Each person can choose, according to their possibilities, how to enrich these 9 days without making them a burden. If you haven't started your novena yet, now is the time. It doesn't matter if you start late or if you forget a day. What matters is the consistency of the heart, not the perfection of the method. Saint Joachim and Saint Anne, who knew how to persevere for years, will warmly welcome these few days you dedicate to them. Let the novena take you by the hand and lead you, step by step, to the joy of their feast. Chapter 5. Prayer in the Family and the Chain of Faith. There is a beautiful image to understand Joachim and Anne, that of a chain. Pope Francis said it simply: Saints Joachim and Anne are part of a long chain that has passed on the faith. How precious is the value of family as a privileged place for transmitting faith. These spouses were a link that connected the ancient promises of Israel with the arrival of the Virgin Mary, and through her, with the very Saviour of the world. Preparing for their feast is, therefore, rediscovering the home as the first temple where one learns to pray. Long before a child steps into a church, they have already seen their parents bless themselves. They have heard the name of God spoken with respect, and they have felt the warmth of a blessing before sleeping. In those small gestures, the faith ignites that will later bear fruit for a lifetime. The family that prays together holds a treasure that no money can buy. These days leading up to the feast invite us to recover or to start the custom of common prayer. A few minutes are enough, lighting a candle, reading a passage from the Gospel, praying together an Our Father and a Hail Mary. It doesn't matter if the home is humble or if the children get distracted. What God sees is the love with which the family gathers in His name. From those tiny seeds, vocations and saints will eventually arise. Joachim and Anne raised Mary in the faith of their people, nurturing in her the love for the Creator. That little girl learned from her parents the Psalms, the prayers, and the trust in God that would later shine in her, "Let it be done." Behind the greatness of the Virgin was a simple home where heartfelt prayers were said. As we prepare for the feast, we can ask ourselves what we are sowing in our families and what faith we are leaving as a legacy. May these days be an opportunity to strengthen that chain of faith. Perhaps there is a broken link in your family, someone who has stopped praying, a bond that has cooled, a custom that has been lost. The preparation for this feast can be the moment to restore it with patience and love. Because, like Joachim and Anna, every family is called to pass on the greatest treasures, the knowledge and love of God. It is no coincidence that Saint Joachim and Saint Anna are venerated as patrons of grandparents. As the parents of Mary, they were the grandparents of the child Jesus in the flesh, and Pope Francis affectionately referred to Saint Anna as the grandmother of Jesus. In a world that often sidelines the elderly, the Church looks up to these two elders to remind us how valuable the years are when they are filled with faith. Pope Benedict XVI taught that the memory of these saints invites us to pray for grandparents, who in the family are the bearers and often the witnesses of the fundamental values of life. Grandparents are living memory. They hold the stories, ancient prayers and customs that give roots to a family. When a grandparent shares how their mother prayed or how she trusted in God during difficult times, they are passing down a treasure that no book could convey as well. Preparing for this feast is, therefore, a fitting moment to turn our attention to our elders. Perhaps you have a grandparent you haven't visited in a while, or a grandmother who feels lonely and forgotten. A phone call, A visit, a moment of listening, can be the best way to honor Saint Joachim and Saint Anna. They, who were elders loved by God, rejoice when we care for those who today have grey hair. The Church itself has sought to emphasize this teaching. Pope Francis instituted the World Day for Grandparents and the Elderly, which is celebrated each year on the fourth Sunday of July, very close to this feast. With this, the Christian community asks for forgiveness for the times it casts aside the elderly and renews its commitment to accompany them with love. Preparing for July 26 is also about making this call our own, to not leave any elder alone. May these days awaken in us gratitude and tenderness towards those who preceded us in faith. Behind each of us are grandparents who prayed, who upheld the family, who sowed without always seeing the harvest. Honoring them is honoring Joachim and Anna. Caring for them is imitating the love of God, who never abandons his own. The upcoming feast calls us to prepare our hearts with this gesture of compassion towards the elderly as well. Chapter 7. Works of Charity and Reconciliation. No Christian preparation is complete if it remains only in prayers and good feelings. True faith becomes action, and that is why these days leading up to the feast call for concrete gestures of charity. Joachim and Anna were praised by the Church not only for their faith, but also for their kindness towards others. According to tradition, they shared their goods among the temple, the poor, and their own household. Preparing for their feast is learning from that quiet generosity. Charity has 1,000 faces and does not always ask for great things. Visiting a sick person, accompanying a lonely elder, feeding the hungry, forgiving an old offense. Each of these acts holds more value before God than many words. In these days of preparation, it is worth asking who near us is waiting for a gesture of love that only we can give. There, in that specific face, Christ awaits us. In a special way, the feast of Jesus' grandparents invites us to reconciliation within the family. How many homes harbor old grudges, silences that last for years, siblings who no longer speak to each other? Preparing the heart for July 26th can be the opportunity to take the first step, to ask for forgiveness, to reach out, to let go of resentment. A family that reconciles offers God the gift he values most, because nothing honors these saints as much as peace among their own. Approaching the confessional these days is the best way to prepare the soul for the celebration, allowing God's mercy to cleanse what time has soiled. Those who reconcile with God find new strength to reconcile with others. Thus, charity towards our neighbors and peace with the Lord always go hand in hand. May these days not remain confined to the intimacy of prayer, but overflow into acts of kindness. A donation, a visit, a granted forgiveness, a kind word. With these fruits we truly prepare for the celebration. Saint Joachim and Saint Anne, who loved God by loving their neighbor, will grant us the grace of a generous heart, capable of turning devotion into works and waiting into concrete love. Few saints have received as much trust from the Christian community as Saint Anne. For centuries, mothers, wives, and entire families have turned to her with their deepest sorrows, convinced that Jesus' grandmother does not leave unanswered the prayers of those who invoke her. She herself knew the anguish of waiting and the joy of a promise fulfilled. That is why she understands, like few, the hearts of those who today cry out for a grace that seems impossible. In a special way, Saint Anne is invoked by women who long to be mothers and cannot achieve it. Her own story is a song of hope for many couples who silently bear the pain of infertility. As we prepare for her feast, we can present her with these delicate intentions, asking her to intercede before God for every home that awaits a child. She, who waited so long, knows how to accompany those who are waiting with tenderness. But her intercession does not stop there. Tradition also venerates her as the protector of pregnant women, mothers giving birth, the sick, and families in difficulty. In many towns, she's invoked in the face of life's toughest trials. and there are countless testimonies of those who attribute their regained health or saved homes to her assistance. Preparing her feast is learning to entrust our own difficult causes to her. Presenting intentions to Saint Anne is not an attempt to force God's will, but an act of humble trust. We ask her, being so close to the Lord, to unite her prayer with ours and bring it before the throne of grace. This is how Catholic piety understands. Saints do not replace God, but intercede for us as friends who speak to the Father on our behalf. With that serene trust, we can open our hearts to her. Let us take advantage of these days to write, even in the silence of our souls, the list of our requests and place them under the protection of Saint Anne. Difficult causes, those that seem hopeless, those we have carried in solitude for a long time, find in her an attentive mother. May her intercession not always grant us what we ask for, but always what is best for us according to God's loving wisdom. Devotion to Saint Anne and Saint Joachim has flourished over the centuries in every corner of the world, leaving behind sanctuaries that still attract crowds today. Knowing these places and customs helps us prepare for the celebration, as it makes us feel part of a vast family that crosses countries and generations. We are not alone in our devotion. We are preceded by centuries of pilgrims who loved these saints before us. In the French region of Brittany stands the sanctuary of Sainte Anne d'Auray, one of the most cherished by the Christian community. There, according to tradition, Saint Anne appeared in the 17th century to a simple farmer named Ivan Nicolazic, asking him to rebuild an old chapel in her honor. It is the only apparition of Saint Anne recognized by the Church, and even today, thousands of faithful come each year to lay the joys and sorrows of their families at her feet. Across the ocean, in Canada, the sanctuary of Sainte Anne de Beaupré welcomes more than 1 million pilgrims each year. Their walls are covered with crutches and canes, left behind by the sick who claim to have regained their health, and tradition speaks of numerous favors granted through the intercession of the saint. Seeing these offerings is to behold, set in stone and testimony, the trust of a people who have never ceased to turn to the grandmother of Jesus. You don't have to travel far to experience the spirit of these sanctuaries. In every parish, in every simple image of Saint Anne teaching the Virgin Girl to read, the same devotion pulses. We can make a small inner pilgrimage, approach a nearby church, light a candle, pause before an image, and unite our prayer with that of countless pilgrims from around the world. Thus, the feast expands and makes us feel like a universal church. May these stories of popular fervor ignite our own devotion. Behind every sanctuary are hearts that once trusted and were not let down. As we prepare for July 26th, let us unite in spirit with that great stream of pilgrims who from Brittany to America continue to invoke Saint Joachim and Saint Anne. Their example reminds us that the simple devotion of the people is also a sure path to God. Christian faith does not despise the visible. On the contrary, it uses images, gestures, and objects to elevate the soul toward God. That is why, in these days of preparation, it is good to surround ourselves with simple signs that help us pray. An image of Saint Joachim and Saint Anne, a lit candle, fresh flowers can turn a corner of the house into a small domestic altar where the family gathers to pray. These are not empty decorations, but aids that speak to the senses and awaken devotion. The same way art has represented these saints carries a lesson. St. Joachim is often portrayed with a shepherd's staff and some doves, symbols of peace and the offering made to God. St. Anne is frequently dressed in red and green, colors that evoke love and life. Contemplating these images calmly helps us meditate on their virtues and ask that they also flourish within us. There is a particularly endearing image known as Triple Saint Anne, or Saint Anne the Teacher. In it, Saint Anne appears teaching the Virgin Girl to read, who in turn holds the child Jesus. 3 generations united in a single scene, passing on faith and love to one another. That image summarizes everything we have been saying, the family as a channel through which grace flows from the elders to the young. Just contemplating it helps us understand the meaning of this feast. Involving children in these signs is to sow in them a seed that will not be forgotten, letting them light the candle, place a flower before the image, learn a simple ejaculation makes them protagonists of the preparation. Faith enters the souls of little ones through their eyes and hands before it does through reasoning. A home that prepares for the feast with these gestures leaves in its children a memory that will last a lifetime. May each person prepare, according to their means, that corner of prayer in their home. It doesn't matter if it is humble, a picture, a light, a few flowers are enough to remind us, as we pass by, that the feast is approaching and that the heart must be ready. These visible signs will accompany us until July 26th, sustaining our prayer and uniting the family around the holy grandparents of Jesus. Thus, when the day arrives, everything will be prepared both inside and out. The Church Fathers never tired of contemplating the mystery hidden in the lives of these two elderly people. When they looked at Joachim and Anne, they did not see just a pious couple, but the dawn of a joy destined for the whole world. St. John Damascene referred to what they made possible as the nativity of joy for the whole world. Preparing for their feast is to glimpse, even if just a little, that joyful contemplation that filled the saints of old with admiration. That same church father left us words that still move today. O happy womb of Joachim, from which came an absolutely spotless lineage. O glorious womb of Anna, in which a completely pure girl grew and developed little by little. In these phrases, one can sense the awe of someone who understands that, from a simple and elderly home, the purest fruit humanity has ever given emerged. The eve of the feast is a good time to let oneself be infected by that wonder. The most admirable thing is that Joachim and Anna did not fully know the plan that God was weaving with their lives. They only asked for a child. The Lord was preparing the mother of his own son. This is how providence works. Through hidden and humble existences, it accomplishes its greatest works. This truth illuminates our own preparation because it reminds us that our simple lives can also be a channel for wonders we have yet to imagine. The Church has seen in that birth the beginning of the dawn of salvation, for from that spotless girl would come the Redeemer. The ancient fathers already sensed the unique purity of Mary, preserved by grace from the very first moment. Contemplating this is not a task for the wise, but for simple hearts that allow themselves to be amazed. The more we gaze upon the greatness of what God prepared, the more gratitude and desire to celebrate this feast grows within us. May this contemplation transform our preparation and free it from all routine. Let us not approach July 26 like someone fulfilling yet another rite, but like someone who has glimpsed something beautiful and does not want to miss it. The joy that those elders prepared for the world can also reach us if we open our hearts to wonder. Let us ask St. Joachim and St. Anne to teach us to look with the pure eyes of the fathers, to discover in their story the first light of our own salvation. Take care of grandparents and the elderly, support mothers, the sick, and those who are expecting a child, and unite divided homes in peace. Intercede for us before the throne of grace, and present to the Lord the intentions we entrust to you today, that, prepared by your example, we may celebrate your feast with our hearts ablaze, and one day may we also arrive with you at the feast that has no end. Amen.